So if you try this play along exercise every day, you'll be amazed at how quickly you start to learn all of the major, minor, diminished, and augmented triads at the piano. Hello YouTube, my name is Jason Paul Peterson, and in this video I'm going to give you a play along tutorial so that you can learn all of the triads at the piano. Now, there are 4 types of triads at the piano: major, minor, diminished, and augmented. These are the building blocks of music, and learning them and being able to recognize them quickly is really important for any developing pianist. We're going to learn them by going around this circle of fifths. Let's bring up our circle of fifths, and we're going to start on the top with C major and work our way around the circle of fifths, playing each chord in the 4 different types of triads until we get all the way back to C major again. I'll explain to you what each one of these triads is and how it's built. I'm going to start with my C major triad, and any major triad I play by building 4 half steps and then 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3 more. 1, 2, 3. So that gives me my C major chord. Now my C minor chord is 3 plus 4. If I start on C, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. An easier way to think about it, though, is to take my C major chord, once you've found that, and simply lower this middle note by 1 half step. So that takes me to C minor. Now moving on to our diminished chord. The diminished chord is 3 plus 3. So if I start on C, 1, 2, 3 half steps, and 3 more. 1, 2, 3. That gives me my C diminished chord. But again, an easier way to think about that is from my minor chord that we just played, here was C minor, I just take my top note and move it down by 1 half step, and that gives me my C diminished chord. One more left, my augmented chord. If I start on C and count up 4 and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus another 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that gives me my C augmented chord. An easier way to find this augmented chord is by learning the major chord, C, E, G, and simply moving that top note up 1 half step. So from a major chord to an augmented chord, all I have to do is move the top note up 1 step. So what this means, if you haven't noticed already, is that if you learn the major chord really well, you can derive everything else from that very, very quickly. Let's look at the 4 triads again. My C major with 4 plus 3. Lowering the middle note gives me my C minor triad, 3 plus 4. Lowering the top note again gives me a diminished chord, C diminished, 3 plus 3. And going for my major chord again and raising the top note gives me C augmented. So C major, C minor, C diminished, and C augmented. Now let's take a look at our circle of fifths and move 1 step along to the left. That takes me to the key of F. I can go up to it, I can go down to it, it doesn't really matter. Let's move up here to F major, and I'm going to count 4 plus 3, see if you can find it. That should be your F major chord. To turn it into an F minor chord, what do I have to do? I have to take that middle note and slide it down 1 half step. So this gives me F minor. Now I'm going to take my top note here and move it down 1 more half step, so that takes me to F diminished. And then I'm going to go back to my F major chord again and take that top note and move it up 1 half step, and that gives me F augmented. So once again, we have F major, F minor, F diminished, and F augmented. Let's go on to our next step. Now we go to B flat. Building a major chord by counting up 4 plus 3 gives me this. There's my B major chord, and now I'm going to turn it into a B flat major chord. Now I'm going to turn it into a B flat minor chord by lowering the middle note 1 half step. So here's my B flat minor chord. Now I'm going to take that top note and lower that 1 half step. That gives me B flat diminished. And now I'm going to go back to my B flat major chord and raise the top note. That gives me B flat augmented. So we have B flat major, B flat minor, B flat diminished, and B flat augmented. If you're wondering, by the way, which fingering to use with these chords, I would recommend, at least for the start, playing every single one of them with the fingers 1, 3, and 5. That's a great starting place. And don't forget that you can always slide to the back of the keys if the hand position feels somewhat uncomfortable. That helps oftentimes to be able to play the chords more easily. Going on to our next step in the circle of fifths takes us to E flat. So I'm going to go up here to E flat. Counting 4 plus 3 gives me this chord, E flat major. 3 plus 4, or lowering the middle note, gives me E flat minor. Taking the top note and moving it down by a half step gives me E flat diminished. And now taking my E flat major chord and moving the top note up 1/2 step gives me E flat augmented. There's my E flat augmented chord. So again, E flat major, E flat minor, E flat diminished, and E flat augmented. Moving right along, our next step in the circle of fifths is A flat. Going from A flat, 4 steps and 3 gives me this for my A flat major chord. Now I'm going to lower that middle note to give me A flat minor, lower the top note a half step to give me A flat diminished, and go back to my A flat major chord and raise the top note a half step to give me A flat augmented. So all together once again, A flat major, A flat minor, A flat diminished, and A flat augmented. Okay, you're doing great. This tutorial is just the beginning. Start your free trial at petersonpianoacademy.com, where you'll find more than 200 step-by-step videos that will take you all the way from your first notes through advanced techniques and pieces. Going to our next step in the circle of fifths, D flat. I'm going to start on the D flat and go up 4 steps and 3 gives me this for my D flat major chord. Let's take the middle note and move it down 1 step, gives me D flat minor. Now I'm going to take the top note, the A flat, and move it down a half step. That gives me D flat diminished. And going back to my D flat major chord and raising that top note a half step gives me D flat augmented. Going on to our next step in the circle of fifths takes me to F sharp or G flat. There's my F sharp major chord, 4 plus 3. Taking the middle note and lowering it a half step gives me F sharp minor. Taking this top note and lowering it a half step again gives me F sharp diminished. And going back to my F sharp major chord and raising this top note a half step here gives me F sharp augmented. So F sharp major, F sharp minor, F sharp diminished, and F sharp augmented. Going along to our next step in the circle of fifths, that takes me to B major. Here's my major chord with 4 steps plus 3. I take that middle note and lower it down to here, gives me a B minor chord. Taking the top note, lowering it a half step gives me B diminished. And taking my major chord and raising this top note up a half step gives me B augmented. So once again, B major, B minor, B diminished, and B augmented. Continuing right along, going to our E major, starting on an E, 4 plus 3 gives me this chord, E major chord. I take the middle note and lower it 1/2 step gives me E minor. Now I take my top note, lower that 1/2 step, and that gives me E diminished. And then going back to my E major chord and raising that top note a half step gives me E augmented. Okay, moving on to the next step in the circle of fifths, A major. There's my major chord. I take the middle note, move it down 1/2 step, that gives me A minor. Now I take the top note, move that down by 1/2 step, and it gives me A diminished. And now going back to my major chord, A, C sharp, E, raising that top note to an E sharp, by the way, we would call that in this case, since I'm raising the E, gives me an A augmented chord. So again, A major, A minor, A diminished, and A augmented. Next step along the circle of fifths, my D major chord. I'm going to start on a D and count up 4 plus 3. It should give you this chord here. Taking my middle note and lowering it a half step gives me my D minor chord. Taking the top note now, the A, lowering that a half step gives me D diminished. And now going back to my D major chord and raising the top note a half step gives me D augmented. So again, D major, D minor, D diminished, and D augmented. We're almost finished, just one chord left to go, G major. Here's my G major chord, 4 plus 3. I take the middle note and lower it 1/2 step down to G minor. I take that top note, move it down to G diminished, and now going back to my G major chord and raising the top note 1/2 step gives me G augmented. There we go. And that's the last chord in the circle of fifths, because if I go one more step, I'm back to C major, which we already did. So repeat that exercise every day. Go through all of those chords, major, minor, augmented, and diminished. They're absolutely crucial to know, and mastering them will really help you recognize a lot of chords that you see in pieces that you play faster and make it possible for you to learn those pieces much quicker than you otherwise would. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next video.